Up next on U.S. Bank Business Watch, presented by the Cincinnati Business Courier, Startup Madness. Our reporter goes undercover as an entrepreneur at Cincinnati's Startup Weekend. The leaders of our community's largest hospital is a homegrown boy. And if you like Greek food, there's a new ship in town for your dining pleasure. U.S. Bank Business Watch is next. Good morning. Welcome to U.S. Bank Business Watch. I'm Brian Patrick. On the front page of the Business Courier this week, what do entrepreneurs go through to make their passion a reality? Well, our reporter, Andy Brownfield, found out, and he wrote about it in this week's centerpiece front page story when he became the 54-hour entrepreneur. Andy was one of 25 people pitching before a crowd of 48 people at Startup Weekend Cincinnati last weekend. This is the 5th time this event has been held in Cincinnati to bring attention to the vibrancy of the local startup community. All 25% participants had to bring ideas, but ended up narrowing them to 10 and working together in groups. The teams worked almost non-stop to come up with a viable product pitch by the end of the weekend. But what's probably most valuable about this weekend is the exposure to startup ecosystem in Cincinnati and networking with other entrepreneurs.
More often than not, what you'll see is individuals will meet other people who might actually end up being their co-founder, or they'll have kind of this inkling or seed of an idea that is born this weekend that might transform pretty drastically, but could eventually become a viable company.
The idea pitched by Andy Brownfield's team, by the way, came in second. The winning idea came from Nick Lingenfelter, but he says he has a wife and a baby on the way, and he just doesn't have the time right now to quit his day job and take a chance on a startup. And that's a reaction that is heard frequently. So even when you have an idea that seems to be supported, how do you begin to develop the courage and the resources to take the plunge and get this thing off the ground? Rye Walker was one of the co-organizers of Startup Weekend and has coached teams in the past. He joins U.S. Bank Business Watch producer Kelly Leon in the studio with some insight. Kelly and Rye?
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for being here, Rye.
Oh, my pleasure.
So how do you get the courage? I can certainly understand Nick. He has a wife and a baby on the way. He's saying, I can't give up my day job.
Yeah, well, I personally made the leap last year back into a entrepreneurial situation, quitting a perfectly good job, and I think it is definitely a tough thing, especially with a spouse that's carrying a child, but the way we did it and the way I did it was to basically do it a little bit gradual, maybe find some consulting work on the side that can serve as a bridge to a new full-time job, or I should say a company that you're running.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's that bridging effect can go a long way, but ultimately you just have to have faith in your own ability to build something.
Yeah, and maybe even listen to your gut, when the time is right. I think weekends like this, and we were talking about it, what a great opportunity this is to just explore your ideas, explore your network, and then it may not happen right out of this weekend.
True.
It might happen down the road.
Yeah, in fact, I attended the very first Startup Weekend in January of 2012, and it wasn't until July that my arrangements were set up to actually quit my job, so it was 6 months later.
And for our community, why is it important to have these kind of weekends? I know you guys do them maybe twice a year, and why is it important?
Well, I think it's a really safe way to get the full experience from coming up with an idea, forming a team, the interpersonal issues around a startup, maybe even firing a person during the process. But at the end of the day, at the end of the process, you have a lot of fulfillment in having created something with a group of people you didn't know beforehand, and it's amazing to compact that all into just a weekend.
Yeah, okay. Well, great job, and thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure.
Brian,
Thanks.
back to you.
Thank you, Rye. Kelly, thank you. The cost to cancel Cincinnati's streetcar is nearly as much as to finish it. This according to the project executive John Dietrich. The project is still in full swing. These are crews continuing to rip up Elm Street last week. At the same time at City Hall, Dietrich spent 2 hours explaining what's going on and what it would cost to stop the project. Now, according to him, the cancellation costs total between $108 million and $125 million, while the project's estimated cost is $133 million. You can do the math. Outgoing Vice Mayor Roxanne Qualls summed things up.
Basically, in essence, what this is saying is that you could end up in a situation if you were to stop the project where you actually spent almost as much in terms of local dollars for stopping the project as it would cost in local dollars to construct the project. Is that what you're saying? Yes.
The presentation, by the way, did not address the expense of operating the streetcar once it's up and running. Incoming Mayor John Cranley has indicated he has no plans to change his mind about his pledge to shut that project down. Coming up later in the program this morning, we'll be joined by a returning member of Cincinnati City Council who says, despite what the new mayor is saying, it makes no sense to cancel or even pause the project. Well, our reporter Chris Wetterick has an interview in this week's print edition with outgoing Cincinnati Mayor Mark Mallory as he begins his last week in office. Chris talked to Mallory about the resignation of City Manager Milton Dohoney. Mallory, as you may know, hired Dohoney. Incoming Mayor John Cranley made it clear he wanted a new person for that top job. Among other things, Mallory said Dohoney will be remembered for the explosive growth he has overseen in the city. Mayor Mallory said, quote, through the most significant economic downturn since the Great Depression, Cincinnati was able to rise out of the ashes, attract and retain new jobs, bring new corporate headquarters to the city, and redevelop and revitalize our downtown and central city, end quote. All as a result of Dohoney's leadership. You can read more about this in the print edition. We also have a Q&A in this week's print edition with Michael Fisher, a Cincinnati native and CEO of the largest hospital in his hometown. Fisher grew up in Amberley Village. He still lives in the neighborhood. He's done some big things in the business world and now oversees a staff of more than 14,000 people and a budget of $1.8 million as the president and CEO of Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. He says children's success in research has in part been fueled by the generosity of our community.
What people may not know is that research in so many ways has been propelled by philanthropic partnerships dating back to William Cooper Proctor, who made the transformational gift back in the late 1920s of over $2.5 million that has really created the research foundation that has allowed us to have these kinds and so many more extraordinary and incremental discoveries.
I believe that budget should be $1.8 billion with that many employees. Fisher says the best kept secret about Cincinnati is Cincinnati Children's. Well, chances are good you've never heard of one of the top-rated hospitals in Cincinnati. Tri-Health Evendale Hospital is located in the back of the Village Crossing Shopping Center off Glendale-Milford Road in Evendale. The quality of care provided by the doctors, nurses, and medical assistants who work there consistently results in some of the highest patient satisfaction scores in Greater Cincinnati. Dr. Matthew Langendorfer is an orthopedic surgeon and one of 23 doctors who founded what was called the Surgery Center of Evendale when it opened in 2004. The executive director, also seen here, is Kelvin Hanger. Both men attribute their success to the staff. The hospital doesn't have an emergency room. The focus is on surgery rather than treating diseases. Well, if you've driven by 4th and Vine downtown recently, you might be wondering what's going on here. The 15-story office building is just a block off Fountain Square. It's being converted into 40 to 50 condos. What you may not know is the Ingalls building was the world's first reinforced concrete skyscraper, low ceiling with 15 stories. It was built in 1903, so I guess at that time it was a skyscraper. It was purchased for just under $1.5 million in January, and $8 million renovation is now underway. The units are expected to be priced between $300,000 and $400,000. Well, one of the biggest construction projects at a local university is nearing completion in Oxford. The $46 million Armstrong Student Center at Miami University is expected to be completed in January. An official opening celebration is planned for the 7th of February. The 203,000 square foot facility will house a theater, dining options, student organization spaces, and a variety of common areas. A huge Greek restaurant is now open in Deerfield Township. Ramizo Greek Cuisine is designed to make customers feel like they're on a cruise in the Mediterranean.
Greek cuisine is actually very healthy cuisine, and we try to promote that in the industry. We are very passionate, and we don't make any shortcuts.
The space used for the cruise ship to be home to a steakhouse, or used to be a home to the steakhouse, now serving up specialty Greek dishes for lunch and dinner, including the little lamb pizza, ground lamb meatballs, goat cheese, roasted red peppers, mozzarella, shaved fried garlic, green olives, and arugula. I hope I pronounced that correctly. It's all Greek to me. Up next on U.S. Bank Business Watch, a new product and a new market for Procter & Gamble. And this old Cincinnati landmark will put our city in the national spotlight. Here's some news you may have missed if you're not reading the Business Courier online every day or following us on Twitter and Facebook. Procter & Gamble recently entered the vitamin business and is partnering with an Australian company. The goal with Swiss Wellness is to create a mega brand that would be a leading player in the $80 billion global market for vitamins, minerals, and supplements. The Melbourne-based company's flagship products are Swiss Women's and Men's multivitamins, the best-selling brand in Australia. The new partnership will be marketed to more than 20 countries in other parts of the world by the end of the decade. A new online retailer is launching in Cincinnati and promising that the items ordered by noon will arrive to you by 5 p.m. Fancy is a high-end competitor to social media sites like Pinterest, with the addition of being able to buy the items that you like. Same-day delivery costs $30. Fancy hopes to have more than 25,000 high-end items available for same-day delivery in time for the holidays. The new 147-room hotel planned for this building, the former School for Creative and Performing Arts in Pendleton, will be a first. AC Hotel by Marriott Cincinnati downtown will be among the first hotels to be developed as part of this brand's expansion into North America. Currently, there are 79 AC Hotels by Marriott in Spain, Italy, Portugal, and France. Another 5 hotels of the company's global development pipeline. The conversion into a hotel is expected to create 110 full-time jobs and many more jobs during the construction process.
We had an omnibus amendment.
State Senator Eric Kearney has been pegged to run for Ohio Lieutenant Governor. He will run with presumed Democratic gubernatorial candidate Ed Fitzgerald when he takes on John Kasich in next year's election. Fitzgerald confirmed the pick on Twitter. Kearney is friends with President Barack Obama. He replaced Mark Mallory in the Ohio Senate in 2005 and now serves as the minority leader in that chamber. 2 Cincinnati restaurants have been named to the list of the top 100 American fair restaurants by the online reservation service Open Table. Boca in the old Masonette space and Orchids at Palm Court were both included on the list of 2013 Diners' Choice Award winners for the category. The winners were determined based on the combined opinions of more than 5 million restaurant reviews submitted by Open Table diners for about 19,000 U.S. restaurants. Ohio had 8 restaurants total included on the list. The state tied with Texas for the most winners. Well, this is the time of year. I was thinking about winter. It has us planning for the holidays. It also signals a time to think about something else. Year-end tax planning. Not a real festive topic, but an important one nonetheless. To help us get ready for the season, we turn to U.S. Bank Vice President and Senior Portfolio Manager Mike Denneman for this morning's U.S. Bank Economic 360. Mike, great to have you with us. So, what should investors be thinking about as the end of the year approaches?
Sure. So, tax is no one's favorite topic, but for investors, that generally means thinking about capital gains taxes. Capital gain, in very basic terms, being if you sell an asset for more than you paid for it, that's a capital gain. So, that appreciation, that profit, is taxable. For most investors in the middle income brackets, that rate remains 15%. But the tax laws passed at the end of last year for the upper income brackets moves that rate higher to 20%, and then an additional roughly 4% surcharge to help fund the Affordable Care Act. So if you're in the upper income brackets, nearly 25%, although again 15% for the average investor, although there's going to be state taxes tacked on, of course, as well.
It's a pretty big chunk of money we're talking about here. So investors obviously want to minimize their tax bill. What would you suggest that they do now before we get to the very end of the year?
Sure. So no one wants to pay more in taxes than they have to. So a very common technique to reduce that tax bill is offsetting any capital gains that you might have with a capital loss. So if you have assets that have lost value, what the law allows is that you can sell that asset, you can book that loss, and then offset any gain in whole or in part with the loss that you've realized. So you can do this dollar for dollar, loss against gain. So it makes a lot of sense for investors now to sort of look through their portfolio, see if they have any assets that they're holding that have lost value, and if so, go ahead and use this strategy. No one likes to have investments that have lost money, but if you have, this is at least a way to put that loss to good use.
Let's talk about mutual funds, because this is something we don't think about. Most of us are going to be looking at some tax liability here.
Right. You raise a great point. Many more investors own mutual funds than they do individual assets. So it's important to remember that even if you haven't made a trade yourself this year with your mutual funds, you could still be facing a tax liability. And that results because the investment manager of that mutual fund, as he's making trades throughout the year, if he's realizing gains, which he likely is in a year like 2013 with all the market appreciation we've seen, he's required to pass out those gains to the fund investors prior to year end. So important to keep that in mind. Many mutual fund investors aren't aware of this until they get their tax documents early part of next year. At that point, it's too late to do any year-end planning. So what you can do is go out. Most mutual fund companies will place this tax information near year-end on their websites. Go to that homepage, see if you can find that information, and then that can give you the information you need to do some loss selling if necessary.
Yeah.
Of course, important to point out, anytime we're talking about taxes, we're talking in very broad general terms this morning, but there are a lot of nuances, rules that are incorporated with this. So if this is a strategy you're unfamiliar with, probably best to talk to your investment advisor, your financial planner, a tax consultant, someone who's more familiar with the ins and outs of this, because you don't want to be tripped up by any of the rules.
Guys like you, Mike Denneman, we appreciate you and U.S. Bank.
Thanks, Brian.
Sounds like it's time to take some action. Still to come this morning on U.S. Bank Business Watch, the battle over the streetcar rages on. We'll talk to returning council member Chris Seelbach about why he's pledging to keep this project going. And congratulations to David Volker, creative director at LPK, the world's largest independent design agency, another of our 40 Under 40 honorees. Thanks for joining us this morning in our Business Insight. Since John Cranley was elected mayor of Cincinnati, we've talked a lot about his plan to try to cancel the streetcar project. Well, last week, as we told you earlier in the show, the project manager reported to the current city council that the cost to stop the project would be nearly as much as to finish the first phase. Mayor-elect Cranley is not giving in, and this topic will certainly dominate and become a tug of war among the new council members. Returning council member Chris Seelbach has supported the streetcar project from the get-go. He joins Business Courier publisher Jamie Smith in the studio to talk from the perspective of streetcar supporters. Chris and Jamie.
Thanks, Brian. Chris, thanks for being here today.
Thank you.
First things first, congratulations on your re-election to council.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
It's great to have you back. Let's talk a little bit about the streetcar. I think everybody's talking about the streetcar.
Right.
Talk a little bit about the dollars that they came up with in the meeting this past Thursday.
Well, we've had many months, if not a year, of lots of political rhetoric regarding the streetcar. And now that the election is over, hopefully we can examine the facts and decide what's the best way forward. So last week we got those facts from the streetcar, the person who's administrating the streetcar project, and as it turns out, it will almost cost the same amount of money to cancel the project than to go forward. And we know with going forward, we will likely see a 3-to-1 return on investment. So to almost the exact same amount of money that it will take to build the streetcar, we have the potential seeing about $500 million in private dollars that will be developed along the streetcar line. If we cancel the project, which could cost the exact same amount of money, we'll see zero.
Yeah, we're talking about maybe a difference of 10 million or so, and we'll have an asset or we won't have an asset.
Exactly.
And that doesn't take into consideration any legal ramifications at all, correct?
Right, exactly. So the cost that it would cost to cancel the project, which is almost the same to build the project, doesn't take into account that we have contracts signed with Messer and Prus and with the federal government. And it's very likely that if we cancel this project, that we will be sued for much more than it would take to just finish the project. Well, we have tracks that are in the ground, the cars are ordered. Another point that, if we pause the project, it is almost the same as canceling it, because our contract with the federal government, which we have about a $50 million grant from, which can only be used for the Cincinnati streetcar, the federal government has said if we don't want the money for the streetcar, they will use it for another streetcar in another city. But that money, if we pause the project, there's part of the contract that says that is default. That means we've defaulted on the contract, and they want their money back within 30 days. Right. So it's just almost a nightmare scenario to pause or cancel this project. As I said yesterday, a third grader who had 30 minutes of a business course, if they saw these numbers, they would say, oh yeah, it makes sense to go forward and complete the project.
And speaking of legal fees, that also doesn't talk about if any of the people that have bought property along the streetcar line decides to follow suit through with the suit.
There's a lot of intangible losses that we would experience. We have 200 people who are currently working, construction workers who are building this project. If we pause or cancel, all of those people will become out of work. We won't realize the income tax that we would realize if they continued working. And we're also putting them out of work around the holiday season. We have to talk about the damage to the relationship between the city and the federal government, and the city to anyone who would ever want to contract with us. I mean, who would want to sign a contract with us when they see this example of us, kind of going back and canceling it mid-project? I mean, it really hurts our reputation as a city going forward.
I agree 100%. I think PR, you learn that in PR 101.
Right.
And I don't want to go forward with that, that on our mind. Anyway, I want to thank you for being on council. I want to thank you for fighting the fight. I'm sure you're going to continue to fight it regardless of what happens.
Yep.
Thanks for being in here today, and I'm sure we'll have you back to talk about it as it goes along.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Chris. Back to you, Brian.
Chris and Jamie, thank you. And thank you for joining us this morning for U.S. Bank Business Watch. Happy Thanksgiving, by the way. We'll be back next Sunday and each Sunday morning, 6:30, right here on Local 12. If you sleep in, you can catch it at 10 a.m. on the CW. For more business news all week long, visit the Business Courier online and sign up for our daily emails. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter as well. The address, CincinnatiBusinessCourier.com. I'm Brian Patrick. On behalf of all of us at the Cincinnati Business Courier, we want to wish a happy retirement to our longtime co-worker and dear friend, Gigi Verna. Gigi is retiring after 17 years. We wish you the best, Gigi. And to all of you, happy Thanksgiving, have a great Sunday and a good week.